We're well. I'm well. I just graduated from my master's today. That's pretty exciting. But I'm here to do the 20th Century Book Tag, which is a tag that was created by Leslie over at Words of a Reader, in which I was tagged by Stephen at Steve Reads Books, and it's the first time I've ever actually been officially tagged ever to do a tag. So thanks, Steve. Before I start, I'm going to show you somebody. This is a new friend of mine. This is Clara. Say hi, mate. She's new on the block here. She's our new little foster dog. I just woke her up and that was a bit mean. She's pretty cute. So she's just, she's going to be with us until she finds a home. And we just got her yesterday. So she's still settling in, but she's absolutely adorable, as you can see. And I think she's had mange or some kind of skin issue. So she's kind of bald on her back end, which is why she's wearing her little jumper. And also it's cute. Anyway, now for the tag. So the aim of this tag, or the rules, are to show a book from your bookshelf from each decade of the 20th century. So one from the turn of the century, then one from the 1910s, one from the 20s, 30s, and so on. I had a bit of trouble for a couple of decades, and I've got a couple of compilation books or books of short stories where the stories were published in that particular decade. So I hope that's not cheating. The other option is to show a book that was set in a particular decade, but I wanted to try and do it just with books that were published or written in a decade, because I wanted to be a purist about it, because these things really matter. No. Anyway, the first book that I have is for the 1900s, and it is Jack London, The Call of the Wild, White Fang and Other Stories. White Fang, or one of them, I think one of those stories, White Fang or Call of the Wild, was published in 1903 from memory. So that's one of them. The next one I have is, Thomas Mann. This is Death in Venice and Other Stories, which were all, from what I understand, they were all published in German in the 1910s. And Death in Venice was 1911, I believe. So even though it was kind of a German publication, not the English one, I'm still going to make that count. Oops. Okay, now for the 1920s, I have The Golden Bough by J.G. Fraser. This is an interesting kind of book. It's non-fiction. It's almost an anthropological study, which is kind of encyclopedic, really, in its format, and it goes through all sorts of different parts of religion and beliefs and taboos that various people in various places have, and kind of the origins of the taboos. So it's really interesting. It's not something that I've ever read cover to cover. I think you would be not mad, but particularly dedicated to do that. But I've kind of dipped into it and in and out of it at various points, and it's a really interesting book. So I'm kind of making that count, even though it's not really fiction, but still. It was first published in 1922, so it counts. The next one is one of my favourite ever books. It is I, Claudius by Robert Graves. I'm actually thinking about doing a review of this and the one that comes next, Claudius the God, which is the second. There's just two, they kind of follow each other, because it is they're just so good. They're not books that I would ordinarily have picked up, because kind of Roman history and any ancient history is not something that I'd really been interested in until reading this and a couple of other books. And I only picked it up on the recommendation of my husband when he was my boyfriend. So yeah, I do want to talk about it though. It's a really great book. Next one, this is the one that I had the most trouble with. It's The 40s. And as I said, I almost packed it in, but then Death of a Salesman. I think everybody has read or studied this, or at least knows the story. So even though it's a play, I'm making it count anyway, because it's still a book. It's still on my shelf. The next one is The End of the Affair by Graham Greene. So this is the 1950s. I read this book quite a few years ago, and I think I was probably too young to really get it or appreciate it, because I don't remember much at all, and I kind of forced myself to just finish it because it was quite short. So it's probably one to read again, but I'm not particularly drawn to it, actually. Maybe one day I'll read it again. The 60s I had quite a few for, but I picked The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, because this book had a really profound influence on me when I was probably a late teenager, in my late teens, early 20s. And I think it probably is one of those books that if you read it at the right time, you love it and it really speaks to you, and it's great. But if you read it when you're kind of a bit older, it probably is, it might be the kind of thing that you don't really connect to in the same way. But I absolutely loved it at the time. So there you go. Maybe it's a teenage girl thing. The next one is the 70s, and I have here The Neverending Story by Michael Ende from it was published in German, I think, in 1979, in English later. I picked this because I was basically raised on the movie The Neverending Story. I'm a child of the 80s, and I recently read the book. I think my dad may have read it to me when I was a kid. I've had the book for ages, but I just read it, and it's one of the very few instances I can think of where the book is actually not as good as the movie, even though the movie's really dated. And if you're like me and you kind of grew up watching it, you know when you're a kid and you just watch the same movie over and over and over again, like, you know, you'll just sit there and watch it 10 times in a row. That's what I did with Neverending Story. And when I watched it again, it's it's dated. Like Falcor is kind of a polystyrene thing with, it's not that good anymore. But still, I still couldn't watch the parts with the nothing. It was too terrifying. And the next one is the 80s, and I picked another one of my favourites, The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, who is, this is just it's a great book. It's a murder mystery really, set in an abbey in the 1300s, and it's a really great book. And I have a feeling, I think I would actually recommend this book to people who like The Secret History. I don't know why, but I always just associate them together. I think the writing is similar, and I just really, maybe that's totally wrong, but in my head that's what I always think. So anyway, it's a really great book. And last but not least, the 90s. 80s and 90s I had heaps and heaps. I've got a lot of books written in the 80s and 90s. And I picked The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami because this is the first Murakami book that I read, and I actually recommend this one to people who want to start with as the first Murakami book to read. I think it kind of made me fall in love with him, and I think if I'd started with some of the other, perhaps the later ones, I don't think he would have had the same effect. I don't think I would have liked him as much. So I'm glad that I started here, and it really was a great book when I first read it. So yeah, and that's it. So that was fun. I recommend that people actually, even if you don't want to do the tag, just have a look and see if you could do it. If you've got kind of a book or, you know, some stories from each decade, it's really interesting. And I'm going to think of some people to tag and write in the down bar. So that's all.